Well, hello and welcome. You are now listening and watching the Spark Your Creative podcast, and I am your host, Sharon Burton, creativity coach and artist and creative and poet and whatever a lot of people know me as. And I'm really happy and excited to have you listening to us today. We are talking about a kind of different topic than what I've been covering, and it's about the art of storytelling and reenactment as a a creative way of sharing messages, particularly of historical significance. And we are in a time right now in our country, those of us in the United States, where there's a lot of um, social unrest, and a lot of information that's really about historical knowledge, historical appreciation. And that is really a lot to do with a lot of the basis of some of the things that are going on in this country right now. And I am so pleased to have a friend of mine, Mr. John McCaskill, with me today. And he is my guest, and he's going to share a little bit about the creative work he does through reenactment and storytelling. And this is something that I'm personally very interested in because I am a fan of history, and social studies was actually my favorite topic in elementary, middle, and high school. I always just love social studies and, looking at history and looking at different cultures and the way people um, have come to be, whether it's in this country or others. So I want to tell you a little bit about John. He is a true Renaissance man, and I've been having to gotten to know him in the last couple of weeks. I've learned a lot about that. He's an educator, historian, lecturer, coach, and inspirational speaker who inspires and captivates his audience by teaching the principles of leadership and teamwork by using history as a vehicle through which to do it. He answers the "so what" question by illustrating why particular lessons in history are relevant to us today. History has been John's passion since he was 8 years old. He presented historical interpretations from various time periods, including World War I, World War II, the Cold War, the American Civil War, Reconstruction, and the American Civil Rights Movement from 1955 to 1968. During the summer of 2015, he developed the curriculum for an 8-week class on the topic, From Civil War to Civil Rights, and instructed interns from an HBCU, Historically Black College and University program. To authenticate his living history presentations, John adorns period dress attire, which I think is so cool, including impressions for colonial, Buffalo Soldier, Reconstruction, World War I, World War II, Tuskegee Airmen, and the 1960s. He completed his graduate degree in history while minoring in music, and he's completed 3 master's programs in military history. 3. I just got through 1 and barely got through that. Military history, American history, and Civil War studies. He's a member of Pi Gamma Mu International Honor Society, Golden Key International Honor Society, and Toastmasters International. He currently works for the National Park Service. Welcome to the podcast and to the video presentation. Very happy to have you. Really excited about our talk today and hope that you'll be, sharing some really cool information, which I know you will.
Well, first of all, Sharon, let me say good morning. Thank you so much for having me. You, I'm so delighted to be here, and you know, getting to know you as well. your grace and elegance precede you. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, I love that. I love a man that speaks his mind. All right. Well, we have a couple questions for you today. And um, first of all, how did you get started with like the whole reenactment? And tell us a little bit about what you do in reenactment too, because that was not as apparent in the bio, but we have had a chance to talk about it, and I'm really interested in the whole reenactment thing. But how did you get involved with this kind of storytelling and reenactment and that sort of thing?
Well, I'll probably have to say that, when I was a child, my dad would take me to a place called Sunny Surplus, and they had military surplus gear on sale for pennies on a dollar. Stuff from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and uh, and I'm sure I bought some of those pieces twice, two or three times. And so I guess that's the first time I actually started getting artifacts from the period.
Hmm.
I think in the 90s, I bought a B-3 jacket, which is a bomber jacket that they used to wear in World War II, and a Crusher hat. And it was really just a celebration for finishing something. I don't even know what I finished it then. But hey, let me just treat myself to something. But when I started working for the federal agency that I worked for, I was down on the National Mall, and I was doing presentations at the World War II Memorial. And I said, you know what? It'd be nice if I could dress in the period, or, as if I was from the period. And I started doing it. And there's an organization called Honor Flight that's been bringing World War II veterans into Washington, D.C. since 2004, all expenses paid. And they're still doing it. The few World War II veterans that we have, but they're still doing it. And when we had what we call Super Saturdays, we would have about 700 World War II veterans there. And at that point, I had a little bit more gear to be able to, dress as a Tuskegee Airman. And we, I guess we called it Honor Flight, Living History meets Honor Flight. And we would invite swing dancers, we'd have the music, we'd have other people who volunteered as reenactors to come, and they'd have their equipment, jeeps and stuff. And I remember one particular group I met one morning, and we hit it off so well. And long story short, I visited some of their reenactments and programs, because some of the reenactments are 2 or 3 days long, while others are just one day event. And that particular one was a one-day event. But I hit it off so well with the group, I've been with them ever since. And so that's how I got into it. But I've also, down on the National Mall, done Civil War, done World War One, a
Hmm.
lot of different things. And it's just absolutely amazing to be able to tell the stories dressed in the period. Because if nothing else, somebody's going to ask you the question, why are you dressed like that? And it opens
Right.
the door for the dialogue. And I think that dialogue is important because, particularly within the past 4 or 5 years, I realized working down on the mall that most Americans don't even know their own history. And you can tell it by the arguments that they build. And they're built on false claims. And so to have the opportunity, whether it's for 3 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, to talk to someone about history, it can be life changing. You know,
Hmm.
I was doing a talk at Dr. King's Memorial one time, and this young white man, he's probably in his 20s or something, came up to me after the presentation, and he said something to the effect that you've changed me, or something like that. And I just said, oh wow, thanks, man, I appreciate that. I should have asked him what did he mean by that, because it would have made the story more compelling. But to be able to do that, and for people to come up and say, man, when you told a story, I felt like I was there. I mean, well, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make history experiential.
Hmm.
And there is the answer of the so what? Why is this important? Because let me just tell you, where we are today is a result of who we have been in the past. And until we are willing to be real about who we've been in the past, it's not going to change our present, and certainly not going to make our future hopeful.
Yeah, and that's why I thought it was really important. You focus on particularly the African American experience in the military. Um, what led you to focus more on that? Was those early experiences that you talked about? with your, with your dad and, kind of collecting memorabilia, or was there something else that kind of led you? Because did you spend time in the military? I don't.
No, I did not.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
was auxiliary Air Force. That was it. But that was not, active duty.
Right.
And I have to admit that how I ended up leaning towards African Americans in U.S. military history, I don't know. I just know that as I look back after a few semesters, I'm thinking, all my papers are leading towards this.
Mm-hmm.
And it was something that my colleagues, my fellow students were not talking about. And it ends up being a story that we don't talk about. We
Mm-hmm.
had there were just under 2,000 African Americans in Normandy on D-Day.
Mm.
Now, I didn't know that until maybe within the past 15 years. It turned out one of my high school classmates' dad was there at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Oh,
And
wow.
he was critical in DC history in terms of Washington Teachers Union. They just named the scholarship after him about 2 or 3 years ago. But nobody knew he was at Normandy. He had just turned 20 years old. Did he say 20 or was it? Yeah, he just turned 20 years old and had an all expenses paid vacation to Normandy, France.
Hmm.
And the reception was hot. Let me just tell you. And so if you look at the newsreels, if you listen to the regular narrative, you wouldn't think black folk had anything to do with World War II at all. They had people who didn't believe that there were black pilots. Within the past 20 years, it's like black folk didn't fly in World War II. Oh, yes, they did.
Mm-hmm.
992 of those guys get their wings. And so it's a story that's not told. And Dr. Carter G. Woodson, the founder of what we know today as African American History Month, essentially said, and I'm paraphrasing, he says, if you don't see yourself in history, you are on the verge of being relegated to a place of negligibility, and then you're on the verge of being exterminated
Yeah.
or extinct. Extinct
Right.
is the word.
Extinct.
Yeah. So,
So this is so important, and one of the things that really attracted me to your work was you do a lot, not only with adults like the young man that you spoke about, but you also do a lot of reenactments and storytelling with young people. How has that been, and what has been some of the more, maybe just a memory that comes to mind about, the way young people have reacted to your work?
oh my goodness. Well, geez. So when we're at reenactments, we get families coming through our camp. And when you walk into our camp, you literally walk back in time. When we're at Reading, our camp is right on the flight line. So it's next to the runway. You hear these aircraft flying over it. I was just talking to you before we started. I still love the sound of reciprocating engines, whether it's aircraft or lawnmowers. And I love that sound. And it's a sound that I remember growing up.
Hmm.
And we bring people through. And, I try to make it interactive. So I may be sitting, in front of my tent at my desk, and I'll have some young kids come up and I'll say, hey, Lieutenant, don't you know you're flying today? Listen, we're changing from the P-47 to P-51. Here's the manual. Look at it right quick, find out where the throttle is, and then go have yourself checked out with the crew chief, right? At that point, I could have started talking about the history,
Yeah.
but I pulled them in. And now, whether they thought about looking at a pilot's manual or not, they're looking at one and they're having to learn it, and then they're going to the next phase. So it's bringing them into it.
Yeah,
And
very, very, like, right off the bat. It's
oh,
not
right off the bat.
it's not just a lecture. Hi, kids. This, that, and the other. It's just very much a part of what's happening.
We
They're there.
learn we learn best from storytelling.
Hmm.
You know, we learn to talk, we learn all of these things long before we start learning grammar in the fifth grade, right? Or whenever
Hmm.
we start learning it. And so I think it's more compelling when you're able to just draw someone into something and make them experience it, right? It's one thing to talk about the experiences of someone, but it's a different thing to allow people to experience that. What does
Right.
that look like? What does that mean?
Right.
And we'll put some of our gear on the kids. We've got pictures of kids wearing an oversized A2 jacket with the May West life vest and the headphones and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
They haven't grown into it, but they're experiencing it. And we do that. And when I was down on the mall at Ford's Theater, I dressed in Civil War attire. And before I started my talk, I would be backstage and I would sing two verses of Battle Hymn of the Republic.
Yes.
And I'd come out, and it was to get people back into that period. And some of the responses I've had from young people, and I would have ways of drawing young people in, right? There was one point in my talk I talked about the fact that General Grant, who was the closer for the Union Army in World War II, I said he didn't make too many mistakes in April of 1865, but he did make one. However, he consented to go to the plays with the Lincolns without consulting his wife. And I'll find one or two young men sitting out there. I say, son, y'all gonna figure this out in about 20 years. And the whole place, right? But it's just a way of drawing them in while teaching them life lessons at the same time. So,
Absolutely.
so yeah, I mean, I've got so many of those. There's no one that stands out. I mean, there's some experiences that I've had that have stood out, but in terms of the kids, I mean, they're all of those moments. And I even lead school groups where I may have them 2 or 3 days and we're going to these points of interest and we're talking about the significance, and I put them in a situation and ultimately, trying to get them to understand the principles of leadership and teamwork.
Awesome, awesome. Do you also work with like corporations and business groups, like maybe an employee day or something? Okay.
Yes, I have been asked to participate in programs like that. I've been asked to come and speak to their organizations.
Hmm.
I have one talk on the Tuskegee Airmen, and even the one that I do on African Americans in U.S. military history. We'll talk about those things, but all the while we're talking about what does it take to be an effective team? How can you work together with someone who you may not necessarily like? You understand that the mission is more important than the personality.
Yeah.
And then you find a way to work together. But here's what inevitably happens. When people are working together towards the same goal and they have to persevere through adversity together, they end up growing a relationship that could last a lifetime.
Yeah.
And so you're always looking to improve. People are not going to work for you if they don't think that you care about them. And that is, and it has to be a part of the culture, because if it's not a part of the culture, you know, the last thing you want is for the morale to be bad in an organization, because folk are like just biding their time to get out and go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And, and I'll say this, principles of leadership and teamwork will cause you to do better. I mean, just because somebody is a manager or supervisor does not make them a leader. A leader can be a manager supervisor, but a manager supervisor doesn't necessarily be a leader. And you can tell how people talk to you, and that's why, listen, the true test of leadership is when you're leading in a volunteer organization.
Hmm.
Folks don't have to put up with your foolishness. And and I tell people this all the time. The one thing that you always want to work on is your leadership. I don't care how long you've been doing it, you're always looking to improve.
Most definitely. And I think the military is definitely being a daughter of a U.S. Air Force retired uh,
Airmen.
gentleman, airman
Hmm.
and gentlemen. Um, I learned a lot about leadership and really about what strong leadership was. And I think really these kinds of reenactments, these kinds of information that you share, and doing it in a creative way, because I mean anybody can lecture. We could all just Google and put a little, you know, one pager together and tell people stuff. But to particularly engage people and particularly young people, especially now, and really helping them to understand um, US history, but particularly African American history, so they can understand some of the things that, some of the narratives that are going on, and being able to discern for themselves what's true and what's not true, is so very, very important. And so, the work that you're doing is just phenomenal and important. And, I really admire the amount of work and, scholarly research that you've also done through your education, to be able to back up everything that you're doing creatively. So, some people say, well, I am not in a creative field, but I want to, be creative in this part of my life. And you can infuse. Military is not considered a, traditionally creative kind of field, but it does have a lot of creative and innovative lessons that we can learn, and it can be used in the kind of work that you do, being able to reenact certain things and being able to help young people understand how history and arts integration, which I really believe, particularly in schools, arts and integration can work side by side to help them understand and get the lessons of history and other subjects. So I think this is sort of a unique way of doing it. So let's say I want to do this. I want to get involved with reenactment of historical kinds of things, whether it's military, whether it's something else. What is your advice for those who might be interested in maybe seeing this as a new or a different creative outlet for themselves?
Well, you can always go online and Google reenactment of whatever period it is. I mean, when when I'm doing something third person, I pretty much call that living history, which means that's me in 2020, whatever year it is, dressed as somebody before. But my reenactment stuff is mainly World War II, and at that point, I'm going back to the period. What's fun about it is I create my own character. You know,
Hmm.
my birthday, the month and date is the same, but my year is I think 1918 or something. So I'm about 26 years old in 1944. And I'm always weaving stories. And me being a historian, I can, when we have mail call, I'm getting letters from Dr. Carter G. Woodson, Mrs. Mary McLeod Bethune,
Hmm.
because I know their stories and I can write about what we would probably be talking about. So I get to do that. You can Google those things. You can go on my webpage, my Facebook, my personal page, or my Jonathan McCaskill History Live page, and see all of that stuff. I mean, I'm always recruiting um, for our group, especially African Americans, because when we go to Reading, that's probably our biggest reenactment of the year in June. Um, Out of about 1,500 reenactors, less than 5 of us are African American.
Hmm.
Well, who's telling that story?
Yes.
And even women, African American women, could be black wax or they could be Tuskegee Army nurses. And that story needs to be told. I mean, Mary McLeod, Mrs. Bethune recruited like 41 African American officers to be 41 African American women to be officers during World War II. Well, most people don't know that.
Yeah.
And so, as I said, I mean, you can get in contact with me and and we can make it happen. We're just so underrepresented in that story. And I'm
Hmm.
gonna tell you something. When I put on, you can look at the pictures on my flight on my Facebook page. When I get my gear on, my flight suit, my parachute, my Mae West, my helmet. Soon as I come out of my tent, I already know what's going to happen. You're going to have a crowd of people shooting. And I remember one day at Reading, I think I was just going down. I don't know where I was going. I remember they had the red tail P-51 there, and I just did a photo shoot, just sitting in the cockpit, and those pictures are on my wall, on my
Hmm.
page. And so many folks started gathering around, and then it occurred to me, I said, man, I could be talking to these people, and I started talking, and there's a crowd of people there listening to this Tuskegee story, and amazingly, some people had no idea black folk flew in the military, and those who do don't necessarily know what those gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, had to go through. There were women who qualified as Tuskegee Airmen, and we discovered one in 2014, World War II Memorial, and she was in hospice when we met her, and she had no idea if she was a World War II veteran. And I did a film about Miss Amelia R. Jones. It's called the Amelia R. Jones story. It's on my YouTube channel. I've been doing quite a few films of historic intent. They're short films, and and I didn't really start editing and producing films until this pandemic started. And
Hey,
I will say this to anyone who's listening. If you come out of this pandemic the way that you went in, you have missed a tremendous opportunity to grow. I mean,
amen. Amen
that
with that. I
that
just
list.
posted, it's funny, just before we started, I just posted this on my Spark Your Creative Instagram page and on my Facebook saying how, you know, this is a perfect time for creative people, especially to learn, but also to adopt new things. In you're adopting film, you know, working with digital film, you know, and I was talking about dancing that I started doing belly dancing, you know, and learning. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Belly dance is something I've always been scared of,
Mhm.
but taken 8 classes so far online,
Wow.
and the joy of that for me, and that it was like a so different thing for me and my personality and everything else, and how much I've grown from that. And that's simple. And even if you don't take formal courses, experimenting with things, going on YouTube and learning things, you know, and finding ways to enhance and enrich your life. The pandemic doesn't have to be just this life sentence that, you know, I have no more fun or I don't learn anything. It's actually the perfect time to learn things, and also to take classes from people that are normally expensive, or it's just really hell to try to go into town and park to get to see them. You
Hmm.
know, you can see them in the comfort of your home and learn the same stuff. So
Wow.
thank you for bringing that point up. And incidentally, you were talking about some of your you know, your social media and everything else. How can people find out more about you and follow you and learn about, you know, the kinds of things that you're doing?
Well, you can Google John W. McCaskill. I have a website, johnwmccaskill.com. Oh, no, I'm sorry, jwmhistoryalive.com.
Okay.
I've got my Facebook page, John W. McCaskill. I've got John W. McCaskill History Alive Facebook page. I'm on Instagram. And if you just Google John W. McCaskill on YouTube, my YouTube channel comes up, and and I'm doing films. I just did a film on the March on Washington. It was my second film on the March on Washington, and within the next 10 days, I'll be doing a second film on the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, which occurred 18 days after the March on Washington.
No, no,
And
see, I didn't know about that.
yes, it was, and it all connects because remember, the March on Washington, Dr. King at that point realized that they had to keep the momentum up. Momentum from what? From the protest they had at Birmingham back in the spring, right?
Hmm.
And so the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church was definitely in response to the marches. Remember,
Okay.
at some point they started marching the kids
Yes.
down in Birmingham, and to bomb a church. I mean, a lot of people got injured, but 4 girls got killed. But there were 5 girls they were in the ladies lounge, putting on their robes, putting on their sash, getting ready for service. And one of the girls who was in there was Miss Sarah Collins, who's the sister of Miss Annie Mae Collins. And the day that I met her, my goodness, one of the volunteers says, "John, come here, I need you to meet somebody." And I walked over. There's a man and a woman. He's got on his Vietnam veterans hat. I thought that's who he wanted me to meet. I shook my hand, shook his hand, said, "Sir, thank you for your service." Dan said, "No, not him, her." And I found out who she was. You know what I did? It's one of those things, you're in the moment, you don't know what to do. I took my handkerchief out, I went down to one knee, and I wiped her shoes off.
Oh,
It was out of humility,
yes.
because of what she had gone through, and that story's on it. So that comes up again, September. That's September 15th, and that's when it happened, Sunday morning. And I've got one film that I did already, but I wanted to produce another one since I'm into the editing and producing thing now. And so there are different things on the calendar that I'm looking to put out, and that's the next one that's due out. Oh, and I did one entitled Lewis and Vivian. You've heard of Lewis and Clark. Well, this is Lewis and Vivian. Who am I talking about? John Lewis and Reverend Dr. C.T. Vivian. Both of those guys worked together, were in different critical moments in history together, and they passed on the same day. And most people knew John Lewis, but didn't know Dr. Vivian. And so that's my longest film, is about 19 minutes, but I put them together so that people who knew one and may not the other would learn about the other. But what I talk about in the film are my experiences with those individuals. My goodness,
Wow.
priceless.
Wow. I have to really check that out myself. Well, we're at the end of our interview, Mr. McCaskill. I'm really glad that we got through this. And I've learned so much about it. And hopefully those that are listening and watching will learn a lot too. And we'll be including John's information, some of his sites and everything on the podcast information, as well as on YouTube. So you can connect with him directly and follow the wonderful things that he's doing. Thank you, John, so much
Sharon, thank you so much.
for appearing on this and being patient with all of the technical difficulties that we've had. It's not easy putting podcasts together and videos and all these things that the public demands these days, but we do appreciate you, and I do appreciate you, and look forward to learning more about what you're doing and supporting what you're doing. And for those of you that follow the podcast and the video series, thank you for your continued support. If you need more information about me and about my creativity coaching services, please visit me at www.sparkyourcreative.com. I'm also on Facebook as Spark Your Creative, as well as on Instagram as Spark Your Creative. So, and Twitter as Spark Create. And look forward to connecting with you in any kind of way. Thank you again, John, and to everyone that's watching and listening. God bless and take care.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.